This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Rolling forward into the NBA season, so much going down, man. It's just absolutely ridiculous. Teams surprising us, players, just falling all over the damn place, man, and not for a good reason. They weren't flopping. They're getting flopped on. It's just been crazy so far in these first couple of weeks of the NBA. So much to get into, but nothing is more important than blowing up your own Instagram with your favorite albums over the course of 10 days. So, I just felt it be necessary to make sure that when I roll out the red carpet to a right-hand man, www.shawsports.net, Big Kahuna PNC, my man Warren Shaw, that he understands my position of things when it comes to the Jay-Z album, the Jay-Z dilemma. What's good, my brother?
I'm chilling, man, and shout out to our guy, Joe, man, just really putting us on with the 10 albums in 10 days. We've finished up over the course of the week, and I hope you, if you follow us on Instagram, enjoy some of those selection, a little non-basketball talk. We're big hip-hop enthusiasts and just music enthusiasts, because it wasn't all hip-hop posts on the gram there with our things. But in general, salute to all the fans listeners of NBA Baseline. As my man alluded to, this is going to be an interesting show. We might have some fans clapping back at us here a little bit. I think there's some controversial topics that are definitely in store with ways players are missing games and things of that nature. But again, I can't wait to jump right in, brother, because it's going to be a good one.
Definitely, man. So once again, we appreciate you and yours for hopping on board with us. In a little bit, as we said on our topic of the drop, we're going to be talking about players that are missing in action. And the terminology load management, like what does that really mean, and how is that impacting the game right now? So that is going to really be an interesting powwow for myself and my man Shaw to get into. And in a moment, we're going to be talking about certain players through the course of the beginning of this NBA season. It's early season, but are some of these players living up to expectations, or we overhype the hype about them? So good stuff to get into, man, and a lot of people to break down in our conversations. As always, be sure to get my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA, or get at me at GameFace Lee, the show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline. Available on all the major platforms. You know where to find us. Whatever platform you use to listen to podcasts, look for the Baseline NBA podcast. Add us to your playlist. Kick back, relax, and allow us to be your go-to resource discussing all things happening in the association. You know how we do. You know how we roll. Let's get it started with the breakdown.
Time to break it down.
Put the bone gristle.
Time now for the breakdown. Callie Warren Shaw, the Baseline NBA podcast. And as we observe the landscape of the NBA between the Eastern and Western conferences, if I were to tell you the Boston Celtics are on top of the Eastern Conference, you'd be like, yeah, right. You know what I'm saying? Maybe back in 2018, maybe 2017. But if I told you that the LA Lakers are number one, you'd be like, yeah, right. Maybe back in 2010. You know what I'm saying? Like, so much is happening right now when we talk about where teams are situated. But I think a lot of it is highlighted on the expectations that we have on certain players at the course of the season. Let's keep in mind, this has been a crazy offseason. So many transactions that took place, players moving to different cities, and the outlook and the build of some of these teams are so different than what we expected going into this upcoming season. With that being said, Shaw, there are a number of players coming off of really some remarkable years for respective teams like the Portland Trailblazers, the Chicago Bulls, the Denver Nuggets, and their core players, for all it's worth, are successful without their core guys really delivering the goods. And so I know you wanted to highlight this aspect of it. Should we be panicking about some of these players when we talk about what they've been doing so far this year as far as their slow start's concerned? So the first person I want to bring up in regards to this topic of conversation, Shaw, is Nikola Jokic, right? This was a guy who we said from the outset, and I think you had him as a sleeper pick for a possible MVP candidacy. He has certainly not played like that so far at the beginning of this season. Now, while the Denver Nuggets are at 6-2, he's only averaging 16.3 points per game, definitely down from what he provided you, last year. So what are we talking about right now with Jokic? Is this a blip on the radar, or should there be some level of concern?
I think there's a little of both for me with Jokic. He's still very good. He's still nearing a double double. But 4 points per game less than he averaged last year currently. And we're talking about Jokic as a potential MVP candidate. Denver does have a lot of depth, and that can take away from their potential shots and production in general. But I don't think that's the case for a guy like Jokic. He should be a guy who's more like his playoff self, where he's 24, 25 points per game, as opposed to the 16 that he's at right now. I mean, that's 4 points per game less, and the shooting percentages are down at 45%, or call it 46. A lot of it made about how we came into the season a little bit, or maybe a lot bit overweight, despite playing in the World Championships, or whatever they're called now, in the summer. And he just hasn't looked like himself. He's looked a little listless, a little disinterested. And while the Nuggets continue to find ways to get wins because they have so much depth behind him and around him, I should say, his overall production, this may be kind of a normal in terms of his points per games. He may not feel, hey, I don't need to be out here and do this. And maybe I was wrong about his desire to want to even compete for an MVP candidacy because of the depth that they have on this roster. So while I think he'll be a little bit better, he may not be a 20-point per game guy, because it just doesn't seem like it's in the cards for him right now.
I feel like Nikola Jokic, it's a blip on the radar, but I think it really hinges on where he mentally will be through the course of this NBA season. It's interesting, Shaw. Like, when I look at these numbers, they're really not bad numbers for a big, right? 16.3 points per game, 9.8 rebounds, almost 6 assists, right? If you were to ask me, can Nikola Jokic do this through the course of the year, last year, I would be even skeptical about that. Because when you look at Jokic, he doesn't give you that feeling of someone that can maintain this through the course of an 82-game season, right? And somehow he was able to do that. And then some. Now, I don't know if the limelight caught him off guard. He got starstruck. You know what I'm saying? Like, he becomes world star celebrity going back home, or whatever the case. But when he came back from the offseason, Shaw, there's nothing about what I saw from Jokic that made me feel like he embraced the importance of being more than what he gave us last year, right? Now, that's not to say that doesn't translate to productivity on the basketball court. I'm just saying that when I see Jokic, I don't see anything that has made me say in the offseason he worked on this, that, and the third because of the idea that we think that he has MVP potential. You see what I'm saying? Like, he didn't work on his three-point shot, or, I have no idea what he specifically worked on through the course of the offseason that what we're seeing right now is elevated us to say, give it a little bit of time. You know what I'm saying? But I think we've been doing that already with Jokic, because Jokic has been the kind of guy where he's like, you know what, for a team like the Denver Nuggets, who needs certain things filled in aptly, they don't need everything from one player, is what Malone has proven, then you can probably get away with it. So to your point, the depth part of this thing, I think, kind of adds cover to what I'm seeing from Jokic. But, at some particular point, though, Shaw, we may be talking about how the depth of this team could be to the detriment of bringing out the kind of person that I think we all want Jokic to be, from what we've seen over this, this 2-year stint, so to speak, with his performance and what he's contributed for the Denver Nuggets.
He was on a 3-year rise in pretty much in all the statistics, right? And now we're at things where he's not even leveled off. He's fallen back. His free throw percentage has even down a little bit. And again, it's still early in the season. And while we record, the guys hit 2 game-winning shots, for his team to secure wins for them as well too. So he's still the man and still playing.
Yeah, I mean, the other night against the Sixers, he dropped 26, 11, 6, 2 blocks, 2 and then 2 3-pointers, right? And he played 38 minutes. Because right now, Shaw, he's about a minute and a half down from what he contributed last year, which I think brings up another quick question. Is Mike Malone playing this too cautiously with Jokic? Does he see something that we're not seeing with regards to Jokic, in which he is not, he's not rolling him out there as heavily, depending on him as heavily as he relied upon him last year?
Well, I think heavily is the appropriate term. Jokic is heavy. So he might be trying to play himself into
he's the
throughout
overweight
the course
lover.
of the season. For real. You know what I mean? Not some heavy D references with Jokic there, but it's a wild situation. And I think there's another part to this too. While, you know, I think on a previous show, we're talking about, well, can two things be true? So my question is, you know, can Jamal Murray be a most improved candidate while Jokic continues to improve on his overall statistics and contributions, while the rest of the roster, Will Barton has come back and he's played admirably to begin the season as well. And that's all impacting Jokic's overall numbers. So again, he's heavy. Murray's supposed to be better. Barton is healthy to start the season and playing great basketball. And there's some overall depth on this team. So maybe it isn't something to be concerned about or worried about. You know, maybe if you're a fantasy owner or something like that, maybe there's the overall concern there. But Jokic, to me, I think is somebody who is probably going to be, we're going to see his best games in the playoffs, as we should for anybody of a player of his worth. But in general, yeah, we may not be looking at the guy who was, you know, 2010 and 8 or 7 or whatever it was. We may be looking at something at 17, 10, and maybe 5.5 because Murray and some other guys are willing to contribute.
All right, let's go ahead and focus our attention on out in Portland, CJ McCollum. And you know it's not good when like every single Portland Trailblazers game comes on and every single play-by-play commentator or color commentator, their first thing that they talk about with the Portland Trailblazers is what's up with CJ McCollum, right? Like it's kind of like Chris Hayes and the What's Happening podcast, like what's happening with CJ? That's like the weekly thing going on with this dude. And listen, I guess I get it. Maybe we're just so amazed by this backcourt combination of Damian Lillard and CJ, and we have such high expectations given what they did to get to the Western Conference Finals last year. And, you know, I almost feel like in some respects, this is kind of expected because there have been a couple of dynamics different about this team than it was last year. You'd be a fool not to say that won't affect a guy like CJ McCollum. You know what I mean? Hassan Whiteside is riding next to you. Then you got a guy like Anthony Simmons, you know, backing up, you know, Lillard and CJ. You know, the dynamic definitely is the same. So I would say this: if this had affected Damian Lillard, we would give him cover because we've anointed Damian Lillard as next gen, right? Wasn't it at one point we were saying that CJ McCollum may actually be better than Damian Lillard? Like, didn't we have like that fight that, you know, we had that conversation about the alphas on the team? Can you have guys, can this combination work between Lillard and CJ? And they proved us wrong.
That was a very brief conversation, but yes, it did come up, I think, for some people in some certain atmospheres.
Yes. My thing is that, you know, they elevated, you know, the idea that this can work with them, right? I feel like with CJ, and remember, CJ was very responsible working with the second unit last year heavily. He doesn't have the same kind of unit he's working with. And it's taking him time to adjust with some of his players. So while he's averaging 19.1 points per game, I don't know. Do you see it long staying? I just think it's a blip on the radar for the Portland Trailblazers.
Well, I hope so. And I'm sure they sure as hell hope so right
you
now.
You sound so cautiously optimistic.
Well, I mean, listen, anytime a dude, you know, secures his bag, sometimes I just kind of wonder, you know,
well, no, you should have said anytime.
There's an overall.
Wait a second. You should have said anytime a dude has his own podcast while he's still an active player in the NBA. That's how you should say it.
Yeah, man, but you know, you get that, you know, that $100 million extension over 3 years. You know, you get a little comfortable. You know what I mean? It gets a little easy for you. So, and I think in CJ, you know, but he is adjusting. They do have new parts on this team, even with Whiteside there. But he might be in some ways, and this is where I'll give him a pass and not at the same time. It's like a backhanded kind of compliment.
Oh, you're good for those, man.
Well, hey.
You ought to be playing tennis with your sleight of backhand comments. You know what I'm saying? Roger Federer can take some pointers from you now.
I give him a pass because Dame has come out like a man-child. Like Dame is at 33 a game right now, and you know that's 8 points more than he averaged last year. So I think in terms of the overall shots and what CJ's supposed to be able to do, then sure, his production is going to go down. Well, that said, CJ still shooting a career high in terms of shot attempts right now, and almost 20 a game, and his field goal percentage is lower than it's ever been. So, again, two things cannot be true. So I'm not quite sure where McCollum is going to find the proverbial rhythm. He's still at 19 a game, but at 38%, that's just not good. That cannot work for if the Portland Trailblazers wanted to be an elite level team in the Western Conference. And while not a whole lot of people are on that side, I think that they can be. That's their thought process, right? And I think McCollum is somebody who has to be better and more efficient than he's shown, and giving Dame some help, not proverbial help, some real help, especially when it comes to his efficiency.
Well, let me say this, because I completely agree with you wholeheartedly. The thing that I think that what people need to be careful of is what you see from Damian Lillard should not attribute to the perception that, here goes Dame, being dollar Dame again, and he's being a ball hog, and, the guys can't get their love, can't get their shine. It's not that. This is a different circumstance. If the rest of the team is not producing consistently, you're going to need Damian Lillard. This isn't, 2017, 2016, where you can get away with having this be a one-man show, right? And we all be in awe about this. You need CJ McCollum to play at a high level so that Dame doesn't have to do these things. Now, right now, they're 3-6 and they're sitting 11th in the Western Conference. But this has been nothing new when we talk about the Portland Trailblazers. They have been notorious for getting into slow starts. It's usually when they get into the month of December, January, around that time frame is when they start to pick things up. And then they start getting wins in places that they are expected, but they're so under the radar, we don't recognize how quickly they have ascended themselves back to the top, not just the Western Conference, but in their own division. So my thing is that if we're going to give slight pass to CJ McCollum, I'm thinking that he is going to start finding his rhythm probably within the next couple of weeks. But where my concern really lies, again, is CJ McCollum's adjustment to helping the rest of the team. Because if it's not going to be Dame that's going to do that, you want Dame to be, the all-world type player. That means somebody has got to facilitate and help elevate the rest of those other guys on that court, whether it be the starters or it's going to be the or the second units. And CJ McCollum over the last few years, that to me is the reason why he's secured that bag, because you can offset that when you have it when you have a Damian Lillard on that team. If that's not going to happen, then yes, I would really start worrying, because I don't know where CJ is going to find his ability to find his rhythm and still be able to say that you have a group of guys who are going to do what they did last year, can replicate that. It won't feel the same, and it won't be the same.
Well, I think that's a great point to close on in general when it comes to CJ, because Dame is still doing what he's doing, and to begin the year, and still averaging almost 7 assists a game. He's like right as we record, right what he did last year at 6.9. So he's elevated his offensive efficiently, still maintain the ability to get other people involved. And CJ's sitting here just like kind of dumbfounded while taking more shots. But that's a great point where, hey, if you're not shooting the ball better, are you able to go out here and get people involved? Can you can you get a couple extra rebounds, a couple extra steals? Just do something different and not just be a scorer while you're shooting 30-something% right now. And I think those are all things that we believe and know CJ can be better at. Again, I don't want to be too harsh. I think we both realize they're coming of age within the last year or two, especially when it comes to the playoff performance. And he was magnificent. CJ specifically was magnificent. And he's the single-handed reason they went to the Western Conference. I mean, yes. Dame didn't have a great Game 7, but CJ sure did, right? So I don't want to get too far off the wagon here a little bit, but, I think CJ has the ability to be better and can do some other things besides scoring while he's struggling and trying to find a shot. You're
tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warrenshaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA, and our topic of the breakdown. Are certain players living up to their expectation, or will they live up to their expectations after having slow starts to the outset of this NBA season? So you have a few more that we want to get into, Shaw. Out in Chicago, Lauri Markkanen. Much has been made about this kid, right? I know you were high on him. The Chicago Bulls are certainly high on him. But this year, he's not really, and maybe part of it is because of the fact that he still needs to find his legs underneath him. He's had a pretty injury-prone outset to the early start of his career. My question here, though, is how much of this is really on Markkanen, or how much of this is on Boylen, the head coach?
Well, here's where I stand on it. When it comes to Markkanen, he's got to find a way to be more aggressive. He's also got to find a way to be more efficient, than he's shown as well too. And those things concern me. For especially when it comes to his aggressiveness. I think his teammates have asked for that as well. Markkanen is not taking the amount of shots that he was supposed to be taking, especially when he came back off injury last year. And now he's sitting here struggling, trying to figure out a way to be integrated into the offense. The rest of the team around him is different. Coby White came off and was jacking up shots off the bench. Brand new rookie, didn't really know what to do with himself. Then you have Satoransky, who's trying to get other people involved, but LaVine, who's healthy to start the year, so he's taking a bunch of shots. Wendell Carter Jr. Not really trying to absorb shots from Markkanen specifically, but he's a focal point of what they're doing. I think even on both sides of the basketball. Then you have Otto Porter as well, who feels like, hey, I should be getting some shots too. Everybody, that there doesn't seem to be a defined pecking order outside of LaVine potentially being the first option. Markkanen really should be that either 1B or definitely the 2A, and that hasn't always been the case to start this year.
Your points lead me right into what I think I was going to emphasize, and why I brought up the question in the very beginning of this. I actually watched a couple of Chicago Bulls games so far this year. I don't know what I was thinking. Maybe I was just really bored or really curious. I can clearly see Lauri Markkanen he does not know where he doesn't know where he fits in with this team, right? And it's interesting because I can think of a couple of examples where we started questioning that with international, number one, international players, and two, with players who we hold a high value at. Okay, so you know where I'm going with this. Kristaps Porzingis, Gordon Hayward. Now, the difference between Gordon Hayward and Kristaps Porzingis is this. Gordon Hayward made a name for himself playing in an organization that very quickly recognized what he was capable of doing and what he could do to help elevate the team, right? And when he comes over to Boston, while his best intentions was to help fit in, the freak injury that occurred, really took the wind out of Boston's sails. And I also think took the wind out of Brad Stevenson's ability to figure out what he could do with a guy like Gordon Hayward. He lost a year of that opportunity in doing so. And in trying to make up for that, they just threw him in there, expecting that as professionals, you'll figure it out with Kyrie Irving, this, that, and the third. Now, with Kristaps Porzingis, that wasn't the case at all. Right? Hey, man, you're our number one guy. We're going to try and make you our number one guy. But, by the way, let's let you know, we got a guy named Carmelo Anthony on this team. You got to figure out how you can work with that dude. You know what I'm saying? He does like to take a lot of shots, but you kind of figure it out. And this, to me, is where you need the right management. You need the right coaching around a player like a Lauri Markkanen to make sure that what he's giving you is exactly what the team needs. And you brought up an excellent terminology, Shaw, pecking order. If Lauri Markkanen is expected to be the man, you've got to show him how to be the man, right? That means guys like Coby White, while I applaud, what he's done so far, he dazzled and amazed people in the summer league, this, that, he should not be coming out there jacking up shots, recognizing that one of his top players is on the floor with him, right? Lauri Markkanen, by example of his game, should be taking a stranglehold of saying, I am the alpha dog on this team. I'm the 1A guy. Who's going to be my 1B guy? And we're not seeing that. And I think that is now a reflection of what Boylen is doing here. Maybe he just doesn't buy into Markkanen being the guy. And if that is the case, then that needs to be elevated and it needs to be reflected upon so that the rest of these guys are out there not going, crazy as far as, just doing their own thing. And there's no level of cohesiveness in trying to figure out, how all of this talent can come together and it equates to wins. So that to me is what I'm really seeing from Lauri Markkanen. 15 points per game is cool, but not for a guy like him, not for what we had already seen from this dude. And I think part of that is because Boylen is not taking it upon himself to infuse the type of, pecking order or organizational chart, so to speak, that is that reflects what the Chicago Bulls need to be doing to handle their business.
Bring a lot of real life references. I think our last couple of shows, for them bust out the org chart, kind of say, all right.
Can you tell I've been to a couple of business conferences? I'm just saying. So.
You know what I mean? It's like, you know what? There's a certain chain of command here that needs to be in place, when it comes to these shots. And, Markkanen, again, he's got to assert himself. He's got to want to be the guy. And really, after last year, he came back, played 52 games rather. We expected him almost 19-9. Listen, yeah, all right, 20-10 should have been on the horizon. Like, realistically, I don't think that's crazy to expect it for him. And I specifically, pegged him as a guy who's, could potentially be a leap year candidate, that third year, et cetera. And it hasn't come to fruition thus far. The minutes are a little bit down from last year, 2 less a game. Kobe White should not be averaging the same amount of shots as Markkanen coming off the bench, but here we are. And I think there's some opportunity for Markkanen to be better. And the Bulls themselves have started to recognize that. That has been some conversation coming from the great Casey Jones, who covers that team, or Casey Johnson rather. He's alluded to that. And listen, they realize he cannot ever be taking less than 10 shots a game. So hopefully that'll be some improvement.
And I mean, they're 3-7, Shaw. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, we're not saying much of anything because I don't think we're not expecting anything. But I think this team is better than that. I think when you look at the rest of the other teams that are in. There were games that I think the Chicago Bulls clearly had, and I think a lot of it is just reflective of the fact that they're not getting it from the guys that I think they believe should be their number one guys. And listen, if they're not, then make sure that it's reflected in a way where a guy like Markkanen can help contribute in other ways. You know what I'm saying? But we're not seeing that at all. All right, a couple more that we wanted to kind of highlight and bring into the limelight here. Jaren Jackson Jr. I'm a little surprised that you bring up Jaren, because when I think of some of the guys that that we talk about with this, I guess maybe I'm speaking about it because there's supposed to be higher expectations. I don't know how high my expectations would be of Jaren Jackson Jr. So I'm kind of curious why he would be someone that you're looking at. I understand because we're talking about guys that are off to slow starts. But I was just curious, like, why would he be a focal point? Like, why did you have your eye on Jaren Jackson Jr.?
Youth and just the ability, what his overall talent is. Again, a kid with an amazing demeanor, and somebody who's supposed to be coming here now and jump in and be one of the main cogs of what they do alongside Ja Morant. To me, in the early hours, that it's been bad, and he's disappeared, and he's had a little bit of an injury here and there as well too. But he's already shooting less than he did last year. And again, we only have the last year to compare to, and coming off the injury from the previous season, I think projection for Jaren Jackson were somewhere in the 17 and 7-ish range. A block, a steal, those types of situations. And right now, averaging less points per game than it did last year, and shooting worse as well too. And I think for the Memphis Grizzlies, the main thing here, you want to see a season of development, and you want to see a season of chemistry with Ja and Jaren Jackson specifically taking place. And right now, he hasn't lived up to the expectations that I think even the Grizzlies organization has of him. And while Valanciunas is there and Dylan Brooks is out here and jacking up shots and feeling good about himself, Jackson is kind of taking a step back, and I dare to say that their young rookie Brandon Clark has even outplayed him in the minutes that he's gotten. So for me, it's a little concerning that he hasn't taken the Bulls by the horns here and had a better start to the season.
Well, I just look at this and say, if we're going to use, and I completely agree with everything that you're talking about. I think if we're going to talk about this though with Jaren Jackson, I just look at the minutes, right? Last year he was averaging 26 minutes per game. Right? You would think that a guy coming into this season in his second year, that we're talking about 27, 28 plus minutes per game. Easy, right? Just to start the season. You would think that at some point we should be talking about him probably to 30 minutes. So the fact that we're not even seeing that right now clearly tells me that they don't have the confidence to be able to keep him out on the basketball court for an extended periods of time. And he hasn't instilled that confidence because of his play that has managed to allow them the quote unquote tough decision to keep him out there on the basketball court for 25 plus minutes per game. So that to me it all comes together, right? Now, whether or not it translates to the struggles for the Memphis Grizzlies, we talk about this all the time with the Grizzlies, Shaw. This is a long-term project. Maybe could possibly be accelerated through Ja Morant. In my personal opinion, I think that is one of the conduits for us believing that the Memphis Grizzlies could be on their way up. I believed in it more in Ja Morant than I did in Jaren Jackson Jr. I only looked at with Jaren Jackson more so the fact that they are doing a better job of acquiring, I think, the kind of talent that they want or that they're looking for. I don't know if it necessarily means that or where it translates, where these guys are going to be elevating themselves to and I'm not trying to usurp or make big or of your expectations of him, but even to see the improvements, I still thought that the improvements are going to be slow and steady with this basketball team. So, but I completely agree with you. If what we're talking about here with Jaren Jackson and his upside and his athleticism and what he kind of showed us a little bit last year, if there are expectations for him to be an impact kind of player, then certainly from this perspective, I think he's got to be on the floor more. And if he's not doing enough to even do that for himself, it only leads me to think that neither do the coaches believe that they can keep him on that basketball court long enough for him to contribute in the way I think you expected him to contribute, or we all expected him to contribute.
Yeah, and I think some of that too has got to be his own self-discipline and control. Averaging 4.1 fouls a game too, so it's consistently in foul trouble.
But listen, we saw the same pattern with Rudy Gobert when he first came in with Utah, and you can see his progressions over the years. I mean, he's still prone to it, but we have seen the progression where now he is an elite, front court player in the NBA, right? No question. Not just defensively, but even offensively. So I could have, listen, if you'd have asked me, I don't know if I would have seen that in year 2 of Rudy Gobert, and I would expect to see the same from Jaren Jackson Jr.
Yeah, my final point on Jackson, it was like, it may not even be a great one, but I'll say it anyway. I think I expected in some ways, not always, but I thought Jackson could be what Markkanen was last year. Really like come into this thing and like, hey, because who else is there? I don't see anybody else in Memphis that is really supposed to be above him in that aspect. And while Valanciunas is very good and can score the basketball, is even shooting some threes right now. Yeah, if you're the Grizzlies, you got to be developing these young dudes, and Jackson just hasn't lived up to the bill for me to start the season. One more guy that I definitely want to make sure we get into as well too, because I think we'd be remiss if we didn't. Mike Conley Jr. Of the Utah Jazz, 13.6 points per game right now, shooting 33% from the three, 34% from the floor, averaging his worst since the 2011-2012 season. And it has not been a smooth transition over for him in Utah. And that team has a lot of turnover. Donovan Mitchell is taking a leap. And I understand Conley is now trying to figure out and get his way integrated into what they do. And Quinn Snyder said it's going to take some time. And he's had struggles and shooting woes to begin the year before. But this just feels a little bit different. He looks a little lost out there right now, and still only getting 3.6 assists. Like I think for everybody out here, we focus on their lack of ability to score and their inefficiency from the floor. He's not even getting, the 5-6 assists a game that he was supposed to. And there are a lot of mouths to feed in Utah. And I'm a little concerned about what we're going to see from Conley through the course of the year. And maybe he steps up when it comes to playoff time. But I definitely think Conley is trending down and not in the way that Utah would have expected.
But they are 6-3. So,
the wins matter.
well, listen, and I guess, you take the good with the bad here, because you had Ricky Rubio, who was pretty much giving you the same thing. And yet last year, the Utah Jazz were a team that were hovering around 500 at the early start of the season. They were actually under 500. And suddenly, somewhere in the mid part of the season, they picked things up. It's funny how they kind of picked things up when they started circulating how they needed to make a trade. They needed to make a move. And then suddenly guys got up off their ass and decided to start playing basketball. And then the Utah Jazz go on an impressive second half run to position themselves into what they were. My thing with Mike Conley, and I completely agree with you, everything about this reeks that he is going to struggle. But I think where they're saving grace here is if Mike Conley, I guess what it shows to me is a fraction of Mike Conley's potential if what he can contribute to this team still is enough to help the Utah Jazz win some games and stay above 500, they're buying themselves time in hopes that Mike Conley become the player that I think that they traded for. So if that's going to be the you know what I'm saying, the logic in behind this, I'm okay with it. I would be concerned if what you're saying is obviously the case and they're under 500. But because they're over 500, it tells me that in many situations, he is giving them something. He's just not giving it to them for a full 48. Or he's doing something at a certain point that's helped them, you know, to put themselves in a position to win a game. They weren't getting that last year. And I think part of that is something that's not going to always be measured on the stats. I think part of that is part of why we appreciate Mike Conley so much, because that's how he was in Memphis. So maybe that kind of magic is rubbing off to the Utah Jazz and could obviously be some good luck for them to win games that they should win, that they sometimes and just, you know, habitually don't win when they're supposed to.
Well, I'll close with this. Career high defensive rating. That's also a result of the Utah Jazz being, you know, one of the better defensive teams in the league. So Conley's having a nice start there. But a career low offensive rating at just 89 right now as we record. So that is sparse to say the very least. And Conley's got to be better than he showed.
Hey man, I ain't arguing with you with the numbers. I ain't got my calculator next to me, right? So I'm sorry. I don't have underdog, you know what I'm saying, talking to my ear to try to combat your numbers. You're absolutely correct. And again, logic perceives that this is unsustainable for what you gave up and what you're getting from Mike Conley. But if it's translating that they are going out there winning basketball games, then I feel like it's a way for them to continue to buy time. And I will say this. Quinn Snyder and Mike Conley, you know, they gotta. It's kind of like that 90 days before the fiance type thing. The other way, Mike had to come over there in order to find his way. So maybe he needs to give up a little bit more. Quinn needs to give up a little bit more in order to put Mike in the best situation that Mike had found himself in when he was in Memphis. One other person I wanted to get into, Shaw, real quick. Because you brought him up. I don't know. I don't know why you know what I'm saying, why you on your son like that, man. You taking him to the tool shed too much. What's up with Terry Rozier, man? Why we got beef with Terry Rozier now?
I don't have a beef. That's my dude, you know, but I want to see him better than he has been. And hey, this is tough love. You know what I mean? If that's my young son, I got to call him out and say, hey, son, I expect you to be better than you've shown. And I'm concerned. And not from the aspect of like that he can't perform, but a young guy, Devontae Graham, second-year dude, has been better than him on this season. And to your credit, very much to your credit, you refused to believe that Charlotte Hornets would be one of the worst teams in the Eastern Conference. And to date, right, they stand 8th, you know, with just a game under 500. Mm-hmm. So PJ Washington has proved to be a better rookie than many anticipated. You know, Miles Bridges has been good. Cody Zeller has been really helpful for them as well too. But Rozier, just his efficiency, I think, has been problematic to say the very least. 38% from the floor in general, and just he's giving you some cross the board stats, 15, 5, and 4-ish, but he's just not. He's being outplayed, and I think Charlotte expected a lot more when they made that deal. I expected him to come over here and be Scary Terry, but he's been Scary Terry in the negative way, especially when it comes to his efficiency, and completely outplayed by Devontae Graham, who's coming off the bench.
Yeah. So first, I want to apologize if I may have mentioned if I said Tony Rozier instead of Terry. Hopefully, I said Terry. So if I said Tony by accident, you know, my apologies. So. Everything that you're saying, Shaw, is completely correct. And I saved Terry Rozier for last because of the fact that we just talked about Mike Conley. And I think part of what I'm seeing from Terry Rozier is very indicative of what I'm seeing from what we were just talking about with Mike Conley. I'm not surprised that the Charlotte Hornets are a decent basketball team, because I've said this before, Shaw, and we saw this in Boston, which is the reason why I was very hesitant about where the Boston Celtics might be losing almost all of their point guards, right? If you don't have a guy like Terry Rozier who elevates second unit players. And maybe the reason why you believe that the Charlotte Hornets are not such a good team is because they're filled with a bunch of guys you probably think should be second unit and not should be starters. And that's fine. But if you've got a guy on your team who at least elevates these guys to play better, and I think that's what you get with Terry Rozier. And sometimes it's at the detriment of what you expect to get from him, because he's the kind of guy that I think can score 23, 24 points plus per game. But if it's for the better of the team getting wins, which I think is exactly what the Charlotte Hornets need in a sense, then guys like PJ Washington and Devontae Graham, their riches, are greatly improved, because I clearly can see scoring potential from these guys and from Bridges and these guys. And if it means that Terry has to take a step back from doing that, and he recognizes that, hey man, that just makes it all the more worth the reason why Charlotte gave up the money for a guy like him. I'm not saying, to your point, Shaw, that the struggles aren't there. The struggle is real for Terry right now, and hopefully he will get out of that funk. But the credit to that is guys like Devontae, PJ, Bridges, and them boys, they eating. And part of that is because Terry is contributing in other ways that gives them the opportunities to eat. Hopefully for his personal game, because he secured that bag, he can improve these numbers a little bit so it doesn't make it look like the Hornets spent a truckload of nothing.
Well, I'm just going to go out here and say, listen, for the Hornets and to their start, they've had with the exception of playing the Lakers, the Clippers, and even the Celtics, they've had a pretty cake schedule. So, playing the Bulls, playing the Kings.
But for a team that's supposed to be the worst in the NBA, they licking the frosting off pretty nicely right now. So
yeah, so they're not the worst team in the NBA, and they've eaten against some of the teams that are, right now specifically, definitely inferior to them. But Rozier hasn't really done enough, in essence, to command the offense in the way that I think a lot of Charlotte fans would have expected, especially when you lose a guy like Kemba Walker. And I think the timing and the comparison, that the perception of that is everything. But luckily for them, Devontae Graham has been amazing and efficient. And they've moved Rozier to the 2 and let Graham run the point guard in a lot of situations, which has actually forced Bacon to the bench in some aspects. So we'll be interested to see how this continues to progress for the Hornets. But I think there's a little bit of buyer's remorse with Rozier, but they really found something, some loose change in the bottom of the couch situation with Devontae Graham, because that kid has been amazing.
Yeah, you'd be surprised how many Amazon Fire remotes I find, in my couch. So it's a good time. It's a good time to be finding a loose change in your couch if you're a Charlotte Hornet. You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA, and this was The Breakdown. Time now for The Drop. Callie, Warren Shaw, The Baseline NBA podcast. And this week on The Drop, MIA. Lots been going on so far in the beginning of this NBA season. Injuries, suspensions, quote-unquote load management. It's just remarkable. We can just basically do a scroll, like literally have a scroll roll off the table of the number of players who will not see NBA action for quite some time. And that even includes, guys that we have already talked about earlier in our shows, right? Like the DeAndre Aytons, the Steph Currys, the Draymond Greens, Klay Thompson, Kevin Durant. So, why does this, during the climate, after everything that has happened in this offseason show, why does it feel very strange with everything that has taken place with the number of players that have gone, due to injuries, due to suspensions? Does it feel funny to you, and it just hasn't just been talked about, or am I missing something?
No, it's bizarre. And I think as an NBA fan, someone who covers the league, you're just like, all right, well, the injuries were always a part of this equation. Guys are going to get hurt. I can't even front. I took my stepson to a Heat Hawks game here recently. Trae Young has become his new favorite player, and he's a YouTube generation. So anybody who's jacking threes and crossing people up, that's who he's going to follow, right? But we go to that game, Trae Young gets injured in the second quarter and then misses the entire rest of the game. Like, that's just some of the risks you take when you buy tickets, you go to a game and things of that nature. Injuries are part of what we do. But now we have to worry about other aspects now, like load management, and what a buzzword and almost like a curse word for some, especially if you're an old school NBA type guy, and a Clifford and Michael Jordan and all kinds of people have touched on this subject and, what it means. And then now we also have seen kind of, to me at least, an unprecedented amount of guys being suspended, in the anti-drug policy and taking diuretics, unsanctioned diuretics and things of that nature. John Collins is out 25 games. Ayton played one great game, then he got suspended for 25 games. Now we have this super bizarre situation with Dion Waiters, which offline we're talking about. This is probably a drop topic in itself because now there's a formal investigation going on with maybe a teammate gave it to him and now he's trying to, not be a snitch and not rat somebody out. But these are all things now that in our NBA society, we have to be concerned about with the consumption of games. Like we never know who, how, or why a player is going to miss a game based on all these different aspects. And I think it's just a unique time for the association in general.
Yeah, I mean, it's totally unique. And I think part of the problem, Shaw, is that the NBA, listen, the evolution of the business of the NBA is so quick. And part of it is because while they're embracing this advancement in digital and social media, I think part of the premise is recognizing where that begins to cross up and like kind of like have a mind or have a life of its own, take a life of its own as it lives and breathes inside the NBA. And so, if you are the NBA, you have to be careful. You have to be proactive. Part of what we were talking about this, before we started recording this podcast, is the situation going on with Dion Waiters. And you raised a very interesting point that with the Miami Heat basically suspending Dion Waiters for taking, an unknown substance, for anxiety issues, whatever the case may be. Part of the problem is that the NBA has not gotten out in front of this. And if they have not stepped in and have shown to say, we have to hold Dion Waiters accountable as well, too, it offers a level of inconsistency when you suspend guys like DeAndre Ayton and others, for taking illegal substances, and as part of the anti-substance abuse policy, whatever that policy, outlines. And so again, then it almost makes people show the lack of consistency in how the policies are implemented, because they'll only show face to certain players. And then I'm not saying Dion Waiters is like a superstar or nothing like that, but my point is that it raises issues about where the NBA is being, fully cognizant of how this is all happening. And you can't say, oh, well, we didn't expect for this to happen. Well, you should be. That's the whole point, right? So it's just interesting to me how where I expected the NBA to be out in front of these things, especially over the years. They have always been a proactive sports genre. And right now, it seems that certain things that are taking place right now, which may very well hurt the game, the business, the money aspect of things, the revenue aspect of things, the entertainment value of things down the road, if they do not look at this very closely and address this very succinctly, it will affect them.
Great points. I think off the strength of the whole China situation, and we didn't really talk about that on the show, and I don't want to get into too many politics, but the business of the NBA, I think, is always at the forefront of what they're trying to do. And when players now miss games for things outside of, your common everyday injuries and things that just kind of happen because of life, that puts a strain on the game specifically. And, to your point, again, offline conversation, even the load management situation it's been just very, very touchy. And obviously stems from Kawhi Leonard and, the varying results of that. But, it's kind of one of those, what's good for the goose, good for the gander situation. You saw that happen with Toronto. They won an NBA championship. So now the team's like, hey, well, we can do that too with our stars and we'll figure it out. But I think a lot of it too comes to nationally televised games, which is also revenue for the league. So if the key and marquee guy is not playing in the game and now he's quote unquote resting, and the Clippers have done a great job in terms of whether you believe them or not, they've provided documentation and had some great conversation with the league about Kawhi's chronic knee condition. And I use that, in air quotes. So because he has a chronic condition, he has to take scheduled maintenance days off. And I think they're going to come up with something else for Paul George when he eventually gets back as well too. But all these things do impact the business of the NBA and the association, and that I think is what the bottom line is. And as fans are the ones, hey, they're the ones missing out. But the league's got to find a way to kind of figure out what's the best solution to all these situations that impact players missing games outside of injuries.
And there's something that I wanted to also highlight, Shaw, and it's in reference to your, it actually adds on to your point. And I'm going to specify by this conversation, regarding load management. This has been, to me, a problem that is very prevalent with what happens when we get caught up with buzzwords, branding words, okay? And I thought that maybe the NBA would have gotten out in front of this and would have learned their lesson after the situation that happened with regards to the Los Angeles Clippers and ownership of under Donald Sterling. The consistency factor, See, when I think of the word load management really should only be applicable when we're talking about players who are coming off of injuries of the same similarities. Okay. In other words, if we're talking about Amari Stoudemire, who's had microfracture knee surgeries, on both knees multiple times, I can understand when a coach says we need to have load management, because clearly you cannot continue to run that guy out there for 37 minutes per game after coming fresh off of knee surgeries. Okay. Load management to me is not you saying that when Kawhi Leonard, who is clearly 100% healthy because the Raptors win a championship with this guy last year, that you're saying, well, because we, acquiesce to everything that he asked of, that we're choosing to just sit him out for a certain number of games because we want to keep him healthy. It's not load management. It's babying a player, point blank, period. And the sooner that the NBA gets out ahead of that, and we start using the terminology in its proper context, this thing doesn't spread like wildfire, where now it's being outlined as the excuse for every time that you don't want to play your star player. You don't want to play your star player, that's fine. And you and your organization should take the heat for that. But it should never fall under the premise of it being load management, because if the player is not being injured under the same for the same thing that had us even having this conversation to begin with, where is that load management? And that to me is such a loaded terminology, and it can just go haywire quickly. And I think the NBA is recognizing that, real fast. And if I'm Adam Silver, I and my committees would need to get ahead of this and start providing definition so that is not the justification and the excuse for every single time you just want to sit a player down because you don't want him playing on back-to-backs, or you want to make sure that, you have them ready for the home stretch if you're a playoff contending basketball team.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is problematic from an ownership standpoint, where it's like, well, I got to pay $40 million, a season to a player who might play 60 games. It's like, all right, am I getting the true bang for my buck? And it only works out if you end up being an NBA champion. So this is just a space that we're in, 2019. Players, rightfully so, they should be concerned about their physical health, their playing, their careers after basketball and all of that. But you're still a player first. The game is what brought you, to this point. And people want to see.
Yeah, because now, then by using this terminology the way that they do, Shaw, now we're suddenly talking about, maybe the NBA shouldn't play 82 games this season. Maybe it should actually be less.
Yeah, so I think, again, it's the bottom line. So at the end of the day, do you play less games? That impacts the BRI, so that impacts what contracts should be. And players don't want to hear that. They basically want to continue to have these elevated salaries, but for lack of a better phrase, play less games. It's crazy, and if I'm an owner, I can definitely see where that's an issue. And I'm a person who's always going to side with the players and their right, to be who they are and to make sure that they can get everything they can out of this, because they do get bartered and traded and moved around, without any regard for their well-being all the times. But this is a balance that I think is going to be very delicate for the league as it tries to move forward. And, again, with load management, it is what it is. But injuries, I think that really sucks. And that's something that the league and nobody can control. We have Kyle Lowry out a month. We have Gordon Hayward out an indefinite amount of time, also with a hand injury. This is just crazy situations for these teams who, especially Toronto and Boston, who want to be at the top of their conference, and now they got to deal with that. But from the fans' perspective, well, at least now you can plan and say, hey, well, I know Lowry's out. I know Hayward's going to be out. Okay, do I want to go to this game or I just want to watch it on TV? And some people buy their tickets a month in advance, but I think for those who don't, those are things you can control. But it can't control something like, the day of, like, oh, he decided to take a rest day. It's like, oh, damn, brought my whole family here now, and now I don't get to see this guy play. Those situations are a little bit rough for the league, and again, we'll see how they move forward with it.
Quick fire answer, Shaw. Of the guys that we mentioned here, who's impacted the most? John Collins, Gordon Hayward, Kyle Lowry, or Ben Simmons? Which team is impacted the most by the injury?
I think Kyle Lowry for Toronto, just them already being down a guy with Kawhi, Mr. Load Management himself, moving to another team and roster. Lowry's having a fabulous start to the season. Again, secured a 1-year deal, expected to be here, past the season. Siakam has been great, and they need to make sure that they have kind of a three-headed monster between Siakam, Lowry, and even Fred VanVleet. Luckily, OG Anunoby has stepped up a little bit as well, too. But I think just having somebody else to help control and distribute the basketball, Toronto's probably the most impacted by this. Simmons should be back since he has a shorter-term injury. But Lowry and Hayward and guys like that, Collins, they're out for weeks at a time right now. And those are going to be impactful. But I think for what Toronto expects to do, and the start that they even had to the season, Lowry's injury impacts them the most.
All right, well, there you got it, man. So much is happening right now. A lot of names, falling off the table, but hopefully.
Did you say names or did you say a lot of lames?
Names, man. Come on, man.
Oh, okay.
Golly. You set me up for the turkey shoot before Thanksgiving, man. What's up with that?
Hey. I'm back.
You're tuned to the Baseline. Kylie Warren. He's trying to drop me before I finish the drop. You're tuned to the Baseline. Kylie Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And this was the drop.
Coast to coast.
Time to go coast to coast discussing the Newsy Association. You ready to rock and roll, Mr. Shaw?
Absolutely, man. Let's ride.
All right. Career highs. Dame Dollar drops 60. D'Angelo Russell drops 52. Man, these guys are balling right now, aren't they?
Yeah. Well, we already talked about Dame and how great he's been, and then D'Angelo with the Warriorless Warriors going out here and doing his thing. Shouts to Mike Dunlap, a fan side that comes up with a great terminology. Chilled, career high, and a loss. And these two guys both ended up taking the L's despite putting up some prolific offensive numbers, bro.
Chill, champ, chill. My man Cannon Briggs, man. Bringing him out, baby. We're bringing him out. All right, out in Detroit, Blake Griffin is expected to return for the Pistons. Good news, finally.
For the Pistons, yeah, finally some good news. It's great to see Blake back on the floor. They struggle offensively. He's a guy who can create. He can also score the basketball, be a lob threat, pass a lot to Drummond himself as well, too, and can take some of the playmaking that is now void with Reggie Jackson and Derrick Rose both also on the shelf.
All right, and finally, Shaw, Rajon Rondo is expected to make his debut for the Lakers. I mean, not that he should be in a rush considering that the Lakers are a one-loss team so far this season.
Hey, man, they are chilling. They feel real good about themselves. Kuzma's come back, is being integrated. LeBron's been just superb. AD's been great. And now they get a veteran guy on Rondo that kind of give them another playmaker. This Laker team seems to be rolling and everything is on a positive direction.
All right, man. Good stuff, man. And I like that. Career high in a loss. Got to chill. We're gonna have to find some theme music, man, when we break out dudes that want to start messing around, getting their career highs in the middle of taking some L's, man. It'll make for some good conversation, some dinner side conversation talk, right? Awesome show all around, man. A lot of good stuff, man, and great topics to have been had, and more importantly, things that we're probably going to wind up following up on through the course of the NBA season.
Absolutely. And again, I love our show. I love the way we do our thing. I love our fans and listeners. Keep hitting us up with questions. Shout out to our guy, Matt D, also a long time fan and listener who gives us some great feedback and content on our show all the time. So we want to continue to have those conversations. Let us know what you think about the load management, the suspensions, these players, who are you most concerned about them not being able to kind of get off to a great start, and will they able to be able to bounce back too. So we love the comments, we love the questions. Keep them coming, guys. And again, I can't wait for our next show, bro.
Most definitely, man. Once again, we appreciate you and yours for hopping on board with us. Cali, Warren Shaw, Baseline NBA Podcast. We'll catch up with you next time.